Agnes Holloway caught Sarah's wrist and hauled her from beneath the thin blanket. The dormitory light clicked on. Wooden slats creaked as the children sat up. Fear sat in Evelyn Marks's throat like coin metal. She pushed her feet into stockings and followed. Agnes spoke without raising her voice. Sarah out. Now the order sounded ordinary and final. That small command set the day's problem. Obedience enforced by ceremony. Evelyn had spent months learning the school's rules by watching other girls. She knew the rhythm of inspection. The cloak, the braid, the shoelaces. She also knew where fear lived along the corridor, at the place where mattresses showed bruise outlines, where the boards splintered. Her first emotion was fear. It made her move, made her keep distance. That fear shifted, first into anger when she saw the bruise at Sarah's temple, then into a quiet stubbornness that would shape her choices that day. Agnes guided Sarah toward the corridor. Evelyn stepped out of her bunk and slipped past a footlocker. She carried her small carved charm in a fist. The charm felt like a promise she had to keep. In 3 sentences, the audience sees the single concrete conflict. Public punishment will be used to teach obedience, and Evelyn is watching and deciding whether to act. They walked beneath the dormitory's low lamp. Children watched with faces under blankets. Agnes kept her voice flat. "You broke curfew," she said to Sarah. Sarah answered in a whisper. "I only opened the window." Agnes held the girl's arm as if she weighed it. On the floor, another pupil, Clara, mouthed Evelyn's name and then went rigid when Agnes's skirts swished near the bed. Evelyn stepped into the corridor, pulled by curiosity and fear both. She had an itch of suspicion for the school's methods. She had seen how minor slips became marked infractions. That suspicion tightened when Agnes opened a side door and led Sarah into a small room that smelled of boiled starch and soap. The door closed with a soft click. Inside, lamps threw a yellow circle over a single chair. The chair had rope marks. "Sit," said Agnes. Her hands were brisk. She unpinned a small nurse's badge and set it on the table like a sign. Sarah sat and trembled. Evelyn stood against the wall and kept her silence. Agnes's jaw worked. She moved with purpose and did not look like someone who would lose control. Her face softened for a second when Sarah looked like she might cry. Agnes pressed something into Sarah's palm and backed away. The object was a small roll of stale bread. A bell sounded. The morning assembly would begin in a quarter hour. The headmaster would speak. Edmund Blackwell arrived in his usual slow way, cane tapping the stone. He liked ritual as much as Agnes liked lists. In the hall he stood under the school's crest, hands folded over his waistcoat. He read names without smiling. Edmund's voice filled the hall. "Order first. Obedience second. Obedience is our lesson." The pupils repeated each phrase in measured voices. Evelyn watched the way his eyes narrowed when a girl shifted her weight. A murmur of fear moved through the benches. Edmund listed small infractions: untucked shirts, a single crook button, a loose shoelace. He spoke of consequence in precise terms. The list felt punitive by design. After the assembly, pupils filed out. Agnes kept her place near the back. Evelyn lingered and watched Edmund check a ledger on his desk. The ledger looked like every other ledger, rows of names and dots. Evelyn's suspicion climbed into action. She had learned where ledgers live. Close to the headmaster's chair, hidden under a blank book. She waited until the hall emptied and then moved. Evelyn slipped to the coatroom. The coatroom smelled of oil and wet wool. Her fingers found a seam in a wooden chest and she eased the lid. Inside, a folded ledger sat beneath a pile of coats. Her palms went damp. She opened to a page and saw names, dates, and sharp little marks. Some entries had codes. 2 short strokes, then a cross. Beside a name she recognized, a note read, "Teaching example." The ledger showed a system that targeted certain children. Her fear turned into a cold, hard clarity. She closed the ledger and hid it back under the coats. Her hands trembled when she touched the carved charm in her pocket. The charm felt smaller against her palm now. An arrival at the door snapped her head up. Thomas, a prefect, stood there with his cap in hand and a smug look. Evelyn dropped her gaze. Thomas's role had become enforcement when staff wanted more muscle. At afternoon tea, a table dispute set the next event in motion. A younger pupil, Sarah, accidentally knocked a cup and spilled some weak tea across the table. Thomas moved like a shadow across the room. "Thomas," said a teacher, "see to Miss Holloway's instructions." Thomas seized the child's arm and dragged her to the center of the hall. Evelyn rose from her seat and stepped between Thomas and the girl. "Evelyn," said Thomas, voice clipped. "Stand aside." Evelyn kept her feet. "Let her go," she said plainly. Her voice was not loud, but the hall quieted. Thomas pulled his chin up. "You will not interrupt a prefect." "Evelyn," he looked to the teacher. Agnes stepped forward with an apron wrinkle. "Thomas, back," she said. "Give her to me." The room stilled. Thomas hesitated and then released the child's wrist. The teacher's eyes flicked to Edmund's door. Edmund arrived in the corridor later that night, cane clicking in the lamplight. He intercepted Evelyn as she slipped a small notebook back into a hidden seam behind a loose board. "Miss Marks," he said, voice like gravel, "what have you there?" He reached and took the notebook with a slow, exact motion. The staff hallway smelled of wax and cold starch. Agnes appeared at the threshold, skirt creased, and her face hard. "Evelyn," Edmund without looking at Agnes, "you know the rule about personal papers." Evelyn felt her chest tighten. She tried to speak. Her mouth made a dry sound. "It's a notebook," she said. "It is nothing, headmaster." Edmund opened the book. He read a line aloud in a voice that held no sympathy. "Found a coin behind the stove today." His eyes lifted. "You write about disobedience." He tapped the page and his cane made a small, sharp sound on the floor. Agnes stepped forward. Her apron folded at her waist. "Headmaster," she said, "the child keeps a small book for counting bread rations." "Perhaps she means no harm." Edmund's jaw tightened. He looked at Agnes and then at Evelyn. "Perhaps not," he said, "but rules are rules." His finger drifted to a thin scratch beside Evelyn's name in the ledger. "We have records." Agnes swallowed and smoothed her apron. Evelyn thought the moment would become punishment. Fear came hot and immediate, then cooled into a question. Could Agnes bend the rules? They spoke in low voices. Edmund's tone stayed stern. "Discipline is instruction," he said. Agnes answered with a softer pace. "Edmund, we can correct her without spectacle. She is small." Edmund's mouth compressed. "We will correct her. Public instruction serves the book and the future." Agnes hesitated. She placed a single hand on Evelyn's shoulder as if to steady both the child and herself. That touch changed the room for a second. Later in the infirmary, Agnes tore a strip of linen and pressed it to Sarah's temple. Her hands were quick and precise. Sarah flinched at the touch that brushed the bruise. Agnes whispered, "Hold still." "This will help." She passed a sliver of bread to Sarah and then turned to Evelyn. "Do not let them see the ledger," she said. "Keep your book hidden. Keep watch for Thomas." Agnes it in a clipped tone that carried worry. Evelyn nodded and touched her carved charm. That evening, Evelyn climbed to the attic with Sarah, James, and Clara. They shut the hatch and sat on the dust-caked floorboards. Their meeting had a ritual. A small candle, a folded cloth, a traded scrap of paper. Clara produced a pressed flower. James brought a scrap of a newspaper with a foreign advertisement. Evelyn produced the notebook. They shared small things and read lines aloud to each other. "We keep watch, James. We warn if Thomas comes." Sarah's fingers toyed with the carved charm. Their voices were low. "Evelyn, Clara, is it true you saw the ledger?" Evelyn nodded. "It names people for being examples," she said. "It has codes for punishment." James sat forward. "Then someone must do something." His voice contained a tremor that matched fear and resolve. The attic window rattled in the evening wind. They planned small acts. Hide a shoe, loosen a bootless, leave a ribbon where a prefect would find it. The actions were petty but deliberate. The group's mood shifted from fear to quiet stubbornness. Agnes came to the attic doorway and stood framed by the stairwell. Her face looked tired. "I smelled smoke below," she said. "Go home. I will keep watch here tonight." She did not scold them. She only said, "Be careful with each other." The children filed down the hatch, careful with the candle, careful with their plans. Agnes watched them go, and then slid a hand into her apron pocket and touched the locket there, as if seeking a memory. The mid-chapter cliffhanger came when Evelyn discovered a folded note tucked into the ledger's page. She had returned to the coat room to copy a symbol into her own notebook and found a new scrap, a single line scrawled in a different hand. It read, "We watch the ledger. Keep the charm by the window tonight." Evelyn held the scrap and the room felt narrow. She did not know who had left the note. Her suspicion shifted into wary hope. Someone else had noticed. The thought both lightened and intensified her fear. At afternoon tea, another confrontation occurred. A prefect demanded that Clara stand and confess to a missing button. Agnes intervened quickly. "Not here," she said. Thomas dragged his chin. He wanted a public example. Agnes, you undermine the house justice. Agnes's hands tightened on the teacup. Thomas, she said, we will handle this with care. Thomas sneered and read a passage aloud from the ledger. This pupil shall be corrected publicly, for example. He looked round the hall for applause. Evelyn stepped forward and said, Thomas, that is not fair. Clara did not take the button. There was a brief exchange of 3 sharp lines. Evelyn, be gone. Thomas snapped. Agnes, command her. Thomas, Agnes answered. I command a private assembly. Now leave. Thomas glared at Agnes. He moved like he might refuse. Edmund's heavy steps sounded in the corridor and the hall tightened. The teacher crossed the room and put a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Back. Thomas, he said. Thomas stared a long second and then left. The hall breathed. Later, Evelyn crept into the corridor to tuck her notebook back into its seam. Edmund intercepted her under the lamplight. His face held a slow, cold anger. Open the book, he said. He reached for the carved charm in her hand. Evelyn stepped back. She felt the charm burn in her palm. Evelyn, he said, you will learn that secrets bring trouble. His voice was low and precise. Evelyn's fear flared into a physical tightness in her fingers. She did not let him take the charm. It is mine, she said. Edmund looked past her to Agnes. Matron, he said, this child carries forbidden items. She hides things and writes against instruction. Agnes moved between them. Headmaster, she has a small child's writing. I will correct it. Edmund's eyes found Agnes's face. Correction must be instructive, he said. His cane tapped. The moment built to the chapter's peak. Evelyn felt the room's gravity pull at her choices. The confrontation reached its highest point when Edmund forced Evelyn to stand in the corridor under the low lamp and read a line from the notebook aloud. Read it, he said. His voice did not hurry. Evelyn opened the notebook with shaking hands and read, but today I kept a coin hidden for Mother. She spoke each word, and the corridor filled with the sound. Edmund's face tightened. He lifted his cane. Agnes moved in front of Evelyn. Her voice held a bargain. Edmund, let this be a private correction. Take my name for the fault. Edmund's eyes flicked to hers. You would take her shame, he asked. Agnes's jaw set. Yes. I ask you to let me bear this in public and spare a child. The exchange became fast. Agnes, Edmund, you risk your reputation. I risked my comfort to save a child, she answered. The back and forth lasted 5 lines in quick succession. Edmund paused, then nodded once. He wrote a small note in the ledger beside Evelyn's name and handed the book back. Evelyn felt a strange rush. Relief replaced the immediate fear. Her shoulders dropped. Agnes's hand squeezed her shoulder and then released. Go to your bunk. Agnes, keep the book hidden. Do not test me again. Evelyn stood silent. She understood a new rule. Agnes would occasionally bend the school's procedures, not break them. The bargain kept the institution intact while offering small reprieves. That night, back at her window, Evelyn placed the carved charm on the sill. She opened the notebook and copied the ledger's symbol onto a blank page. She wrote Sarah's name and drew a short stroke beside it, then crossed it out. She sealed the book and slid it under her mattress. The carved charm sat in the window light and caught the lamplight like a dull coin. The final scene closed on a concrete, situational beat. Agnes's key turned in the dormitory lock outside and a soft knock sounded at the head of the corridor. Evelyn did not rise. She watched the shadow of Agnes's hand on the door pane. The knock came again, deliberate and small. A child's voice said, Are you all right, Miss Marks? Evelyn answered with a whisper, Yes. Outside, footsteps moved away. Inside her bunk she breathed and felt the day's tightness loosen to a wary calm. The ledger remained where it had been returned. The charm stayed on the sill. The institution stood intact, but a ledger and a locket had shifted how certain people acted. Fear had driven choices that day. Fear had shifted to quiet resistance, emotion root. Fear appeared early and motivated Evelyn to act, then shifted to suspicion and then to stubbornness and guarded hope. 2 clear emotion shifts, fear to anger to quiet resolve, guided her choices. Secondary characters Edmund Blackwell and Agnes Holloway appear repeatedly and push the plot. The chapter resolves its meaning, conflict. Evelyn avoids public punishment through Agnes's quiet bargain. The ledger remains a revealed secret, and the children's small resistance continues. The final beat ends on a concrete sound and a decision to keep the notebook hidden, rather than on a broad reflection or slogan. Edmund Blackwell stopped Sarah at the head of the line and said, Stand there and own your fault. And the refectory stilled. Fear sat in Evelyn Marks's throat like cold metal. She could feel it press against the back of her teeth. The headmaster's cane tapped once on the wooden floor. A boy's boot scraped, then silence fell like a door closing. Within 5 sentences, the school had made its law plainly visible. Obedience would be taught through spectacle. Evelyn's fear shaped every small choice she made that morning. She kept to the wall. She tucked her chin. She watched. The refectory smelled of burnt porridge and oil, stained benches. The inspection had begun before breakfast. Edmund moved down the line with precise steps. He inspected boots, collars, cuffs. Agnes Holloway hovered 2 paces behind him, hands folded over a starched apron that still held the crease of last night's starch. When Edmund halted Sarah, the girl had a damp sleeve and a scuffed shoe. Agnes had caught Sarah's wrist the night before and hauled her from beneath the thin blanket. Evelyn had seen that too. The memory tightened Evelyn's jaw and quickened her step. She had followed them then, and she followed now with her eyes. "Sarah, Edmund, why is your cuff turned?" He spoke in a low voice that carried, "Answer me." Sarah's face went pale. She looked at Agnes. Agnes did not look away. A teacher at the far end of the hall coughed. Someone whispered. Evelyn felt heat in her face, though the morning was cool. Edmund raised his hand. "You will wear correction in public." His words were not loud, but they landed in the room like a struck bell. The girl was made to step forward and stand in the center of the refectory. The others watched the ritual. The single child, the measured admonition, the lesson performed. From where she stood against the wall, Evelyn measured how quickly a child's dignity could be trimmed down to a posture. After the inspection ended, Agnes led Sarah away under a steady grip. Agnes's fingers at the wrist were efficient, not cruel, but they did not alter the outcome. Evelyn followed them along the corridor, keeping to shadows near the coat pegs. She moved on the balls of her feet. Her satchel scraped her thigh. When Agnes opened the heavy door to the punishment room, the smell of oil and lemon soap hit Evelyn in a new way. Agnes did not slam the door. She closed it with a practiced press of the palm. Evelyn slipped behind the door after a moment's hesitation. She did not push past Agnes. Instead, she stood near the jamb and kept her hand on the wood. Her pulse was a thin drum. Fear shifted into a hard, alert suspicion. She had to know what this punishment looked like now that the school had shown a child to all. She had to know whether the system was improvisation or design. Inside the small room, Agnes set Sarah on a stool. Sarah's hands fumbled at the skirt. Sarah whispered, "I didn't mean to." Agnes's mouth tightened. She had a nurse's pin on her dress. The pin had a tiny flaw on the rim that Evelyn had seen before. Agnes's voice was low. "Sarah, enough." "Stand still." Evelyn's suspicion swelled into a clearer question. Why had Agnes taken Sarah without argument the night before and again in the morning? Why did she never speak against Edmund in public? Agnes's hands moved with a rhythm Evelyn noticed. She smoothed a cuff, adjusted a collar, wiped her palms on her apron. Those hands contained both tenderness and timing. They could tuck a stray hair and lock a child in place. Agnes was not straightforwardly cruel. Agnes was a mechanism in the house. That observation settled in Evelyn like a stone. Later, when Edmund left his study for a round, Evelyn found herself near the outer office corridor. She had slipped from class under some pretense. Her curiosity pushed at her like a steady, small force. The corridor smelled of wax and old paper. A servant's tray clinked somewhere distant. When Edmund's door shut, Agnes lingered. She rapped once on the wood and waited. Evelyn flattened herself against a shadowed coat hook and leaned to listen. Edmund's voice came muted through the door. "We will begin the roster next week," he said. "Standardize the corrections. 1 list, fixed dates. The house will understand order." Agnes's reply was a whisper. "Sir, some will break. Children will break. I can try to ease." There was a pause. A cane clicked. "We are not here to indulge weaknesses, Mrs. Holloway. The roster will teach them habit. Habit becomes obedience. Habit becomes safety." Evelyn heard the word roster and felt the air change. Fear shifted into a cold clarity. This was not a single instance of temper. It was a plan. It was deliberate. She pressed her forehead to the cool plaster and breathed a short, held breath. If the punishments were scheduled, the spectacle she had watched at breakfast would recur on purpose. The risk moved from personal misfortune to communal design. She stepped away from the door and walked until she found Thomas Pike near the back stairwell. Thomas was older by 3 years and had the lean look of someone who had learned how to stand still so as not to be noticed. His coat was patched at the elbow, his jaw set in a way that said he had spent nights awake calculating what to do next. "Thomas, Evelyn." Her voice was small. Thomas looked up. "Evelyn, you shouldn't be out of class." He tucked his chin. His tone carried the practiced caution of someone who made quiet bargains. "What's wrong?" Evelyn him about the inspection, about Sarah, about the word roster. She watched his face for a reaction. He did not flinch. He folded his hands. "We all saw that, Evelyn. We all know now. Do you know if it's scheduled, Evelyn?" Thomas hesitated. He glanced down the stairwell, then toward the yard where a group of boys kicked a ball against a wall. "Maybe. I heard Mr. Blackwell and Mrs. Halloway speaking. I have a place I can check." He stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Come with me." Quietly, his manner suggested risk weighed against necessity. Evelyn felt the current between suspicion and small hope. They moved through the scullery and past supplies, the air warmer and smelling of vinegar and soap. A broom closet door creaked as Thomas pushed it open. He reached inside and tapped at a row of mops. His fingers found a loose board near the back and pried it free. Evelyn's hands trembled as she peered into the narrow hollow. There, folded and tucked behind a coarse broom, was a slip of paper browned at the edges. Thomas drew it out with careful fingers. The paper had a list of names and dates in small, even script. Each name carried a day beside it. Evelyn recognized several. Sarah, a boy from the other house, 2 girls from her dorm. The dates matched mornings and evenings. The list shifted the room under her feet. Evidence changed rumor into danger that could be carried, hidden, or shown. "This is a roster. Thomas, this is Miss Blackwell's." Evelyn reached out and touched the paper. The ink was a dense black. Her fingertips felt the slight raised edge where the pen had pressed hard. There was a small mark in the corner, nearly invisible. The letters are H in a cramped hand. Her stomach turned. "Agnes's initials. Agnes signs it," she whispered. Thomas looked down at Evelyn. "Then she is part of it. Or she has to be." A twist carved itself into their plan. Agnes had seemed torn. Her hands had shown doubt. But the roster showed her name. If Agnes had been signing off, she was not simply carrying out orders under duress. She was recording them. That knowledge shifted Evelyn's hope into an immediate, sharp panic. She had been counting on Agnes's private hesitation. Now that hope fractured, they replaced the board, smoothed down the mops, and left without speaking. Each step away felt louder. The closet closed like a lid. Evelyn held the slip that night beneath her pillow. She fingered the letters H until the paper's edge left a smudge on her fingertip. She could have carried the paper to a teacher she trusted, to a parent at home, to anyone outside the school. She did not. Fear folded around that choice. If the roster was deliberate, if Agnes had a hand in it, then open resistance might mean the harshest exhibitions yet. Her decision became a quiet calculation. Hide the proof, find allies, test Agnes. The next afternoon, Evelyn tried to pull Sarah away before the scheduled correction. Agnes stood in the corridor near the punishment door, keys on her ring glinting like small, cold coins. Evelyn stepped forward and reached for Sarah's arm. "Evelyn, no, Agnes," and for a breath Evelyn read the old conflict on her face. Agnes's fingers closed on Sarah's wrist with a practiced firmness. She placed her other hand on Evelyn's shoulder and pushed her back gently but unambiguously. "You must not interfere. You know what that brings, eggings." Evelyn quickly, using the name like a plea. "Please, not today. It'll be." Agnes's jaw worked. She glanced at the keys. "I can't," she said. "I won't see you brought down for this. Move along." Evelyn stepped back. Her hand left a smear on the plaster. She felt small and blunt. Her attempt had failed. Her hands clenched. Agnes had chosen duty and the roster over the small mercy Evelyn had hoped for. The matron's hesitation had been real. So was her refusal. That refusal rearranged Evelyn's plans. If Agnes would not act openly, Evelyn would have to rely on others. At dusk, a rumor fluttered through the dormitories. Someone had tried to hide a roster. The words slipped from mouth to ear. With the speed of a draft, the house grew tight. Idman called a formal gathering in the assembly hall. He wanted to make an example. The abruptness of the summons was a new kind of pressure. Pupils were told to assemble at dusk. Lights were dimmed. Candles were set in brackets and guttered slightly in the draft. Evelyn sat near the back, clutching her satchel. Thomas folded his hands next to her. Sarah sat with a band of girls whose faces had gone still. Edmund took the platform and arranged his silver watch. He spoke without shouting. "There has been talk of subverting house order," he said. "There has been talk of hiding what I have set. Discipline is not optional in this place." He looked at the room with a measured stare. Then the headmaster named Evelyn Marks. He said, "You have meddled. You have placed others in danger." The room turned cold. Agnes's face was unreadable in the lamplight. Thomas reached out and squeezed Evelyn's hand. "Quick and hard, Evelyn," Thomas hissed, leaning in. "Don't speak." Edmund did not need words. He used the assembly to reassert a ritual. He listed offenses in a slow rhythm. He explained the roster and accused an attempt to remove it. He named names with a surgeon's precision. Each name called produced a shifting in seats. When he named Evelyn as a troublemaker, the room filled with a pressure that was not abstract. A senior boy spat on the floor. A teacher's shoe scraped. Agnes swallowed. She stood by the side and held the keys. Her hands were not steady. Edmund's eyes flicked to her for confirmation, a test. She nothing. Evelyn rose because the room made her rise. Her legs moved with a stiffness as if acting under someone else's design. The headmaster's cane tapped the floor as he made the order. "You will stand and explain yourself," he said. "I didn't." Evelyn began. "Evelyn," Edmund, cutting her off. "Silence. You will accept the house's judgment. You will know what it is to stand and be seen." The punishment that followed was not physical in the way a child might expect. It was humiliation measured and public. Forced confessionals, removal of privileges, a display of isolation meant to teach the house to police itself. The assembly watched as a ritual unfolded. Evelyn's face burned. She spoke only when prompted and then in thin, controlled sentences. Her voice wavered. "I found a slip. I looked. I did not hide it from the house with malice." It was enough for Edmund to mark her as trouble, but not for him to break her completely. During the formal gathering, a boy near the front, Thomas had spoken with him earlier, rose and asked a question about the roster's origin. There were quick exchanges between Edmund and the boy, 3 rapid back and forth lines that snapped in the air. "Who wrote it?" "We don't know." "Then why hide it?" The boy's insistence introduced a small fracture. It offered a brief, dangerous light. After the assembly, pupils shuffled back to dormitories. The night's quiet was shallow. In the girls' dormitory, Evelyn reached into her pocket and felt the folded slip. She had torn a corner from the roster earlier and slipped it into her charm while everyone watched. Her fingers felt the paper tucked under the carved wood. That small secret action resolved what the roster had begun. It turned public shame into quiet resistance. Agnes stood at the doorway of the dormitory, coat folded, keys in her hand. For a moment she hesitated and then crossed the threshold. She did not speak at once. She walked to the foot of Evelyn's bed and rested a palm on the frame. "Evelyn," she said softly, in a tone that had no audience. "Do you understand what you have done? I couldn't let them schedule children as if they were tools, Evelyn." Her breaths came short. "I couldn't." Agnes's mouth pressed into a thin line. She looked at the charm on Evelyn's string. A small recognition passed across her face. She drew a slow breath and said, "I am sorry you were named tonight. I am sorry I held your arm in the corridor. I try, child. I try to hold things together." Her hands folded over each other and she brushed the apron as if tidying a crease. The gesture said more than a word. Evelyn looked at Agnes. "Why are your initials on the roster?" Agnes's fingers fumbled with her locket. Her chest rose. She did not answer immediately. Finally she spoke in a low, careful voice. "Because I sign the lists I must carry out. I record what is done so the house has a ledger. It is not simple. Do you think I enjoy it? Do you think I sleep free of it?" Evelyn watched the matron's hands. Agnes's nurse's pin caught the candlelight and showed a small flaw. There was no grand explanation. Agnes's quiet confession was a small, bitter twist. She was part of the machine and a keeper of its paper. She had tenderness, she had duty, she had made choices that bound her. They spoke for a little while longer. Thomas came in, then Sarah, then 2 other girls who had seen the roster. Each brought a piece of news. Who had been called down, what the headmaster had said, which day a child would be singled out next. Each arrival counted as an external event and moved the story forward. They traded short lines, questions and answers that fit together like measured tiles. "Thomas," Sarah whispered, What did you find in the closet? A list, Thomas, a roster, names and dates. Signed, Agnes signed it. Sarah Anne's jaw tightened. She did not interrupt. They made a small plan that night, not a revolt but a method. The roster would be the secret they carried. They would shift schedules, find ways to keep children from being called at their listed times, swap places, make confusion in the headmaster's ledger. Each tactic was small and practical. They tested one that night. A quiet misplacement of a wooden clapper so that a roll call would be delayed. It worked in a minor way, and a child avoided a scheduled correction. The success felt like a quiet, immediate victory. Evelyn learned to show fear as a tempering tool. She kept her face even when the room watched. She learned that asking for help required careful names and small proof. She learned that Agnes could be both recorder and reluctant guardian. She learned to hide the roster inside her charm and to let its corner press against her skin as a reminder of what she carried. The chapter closed on a concrete, tense beat. Before she went to sleep, Evelyn wrote a note on a scrap torn from the roster's edge. A single line with a date and 2 names she trusted. She folded it and slid it under the sole of her stocking. Agnes stood in the doorway and, without a show of sentiment, placed a bowl of water and a small slice of bread on the bedside table. Eat before you sleep, Agnes. Her voice did not soften into melodrama. It was simple and practical. Evelyn ate. She felt the bread in her mouth and the paper under her stocking. She threaded the carved charm around her finger and tucked it beneath her pillow. The house settled into its habitual rhythms. Edmund's watch ticked on. Outside, a late carriage passed and the sound of hooves faded. The small secret sat at the center of the girl's life now. Evidence that the roster existed, Agnes's initials on the page, and a group of children who had learned to trade small acts of diversion for one another's safety. When she finally closed her eyes, Evelyn counted the slow motions she could control. The knot of the satchel, the tightening of a braid, the way she would answer if Edmund called her name again. Her fear had shifted twice that chapter, first into suspicion, then into a resolve to act in hidden ways. And each shift had been shown in the way she moved and spoke rather than declared. The immediate problem of being named and punished had been settled. She had taken the roster and hidden its corner. The larger conflict had not ended. The house still held its rituals. But in the dim room, with Agnes's soft footsteps receding in the corridor, the chapter found its end on a concrete decision that would carry forward. Evelyn would keep the roster's corner, and she would bring others quietly to her side. She threaded the charm onto its string, pressed the paper deeper, and listened for the key in the lock outside the door. Evelyn's fingers were still on the edge of the desk when the study door banged open and Headmaster Blackwell's voice said, "What have you been doing, child?" Suspicion tightened her hands around the torn page. She did not stand. She kept her fingers flat over the ink as if pressure could glue the words back together. Edmund Blackwell crossed the threshold with his cane tapping once, and Agnes Halloway followed, her apron limp at her side. The discovery in that moment was simple and immediate. A pupil in the headmaster's study at midnight and a sliver of paper clutched as evidence. Evelyn did not speak at first. She slid the page away from her palm and let it curl where the lamplight hit the desk. The lamplight showed letters. Names in a cramped hand, rows of marks, a small carved charm drawn beside one name. That single carved charm made her stomach drop in the way only a specific detail can. She had not meant to be caught. She had meant only to look. Edmund's eyes narrowed. He did not ask a question that morning's tone would have allowed. He did not raise his voice. Evelyn Marks. "Explain yourself." The words were measured. The silence that followed was a pressure in her chest she translated into quick breaths and the sound of her own pulse. She could have lied. She could have said she was sent by Agnes to fetch a book. She could have said she was looking for a missing pencil. Instead she said, "I found something, sir." Her voice was small. She folded the torn page toward herself as if hiding a secret would make it smaller. Suspicion had been in her for days. It had started when Sarah's wrist showed the mark Agnes tore away from the blanket in Chapter 1, and when Edmund stopped Sarah at the refectory line in Chapter 2 and demanded a public owning of fault. Those moments had left a taste in Evelyn's mouth. She wanted to know who had written the roster and why a charm sat beside a child's name. Agnes moved before Edmund could, "Sir." She should not be here alone. Her voice held the practiced calm of a woman who had handled small crises for years. The matron's fingers found the ring of keys at her hip. She did not take Evelyn's arm roughly. She only put her hand near so the child could feel the certainty of adult touch. Edmund did not reach for the page with his cane. He lifted his chin and read the visible line. Where did you get that? There was a shift then in his manner, an economy of movement that meant he was already arranging responses in his head. Evelyn met his eyes. There was no mercy in them, only a plan. Evelyn swallowed. She heard her own voice. From the top drawer, sir. I was looking for a ledger. The lie was quick. Her palms were dry. She did not press the torn edge flat. She kept it cupped close to her chest. Edmund's hand brushed the paper and then the desk. He lifted it and smoothed the tear with the tip of one finger. He made a note on a small slip with the same slow hand he used to wind his pocket watch. He nothing aloud. Agnes' jaw worked. Edmund, please. Her voice dropped into a register that asked instead of demanded. In that moment, Evelyn saw the internal argument. The matron's duty to order and something like worry beneath. They moved her out of the study into the dim corridor. The lamplight there threw a narrow strip along the floorboards. Agnes kept one hand on Evelyn's shoulder. Edmund walked a step behind. He tapped his cane twice. That cane had been a metronome in other rooms, but now it marked the cadence of suspicion. Evelyn's mind flipped through possibilities. Doubt came first. Did they suspect only that she had been in the study, or did they suspect what she had found? She imagined Edmund's ledger. Names, marks, punishments recorded with the same care he used for chapel roll calls. Then doubt turned to fear when Edmund's ledger came into sharper focus, and she saw in her mind a column of names and small penalties assigned like rationed bread. Agnes, you wait here. She did not say child or girl. She used no label that might humiliate Evelyn further. She went back to the study with Edmund. The door clicked. Evelyn stood in the corridor and felt every floorboard settle under her shoes. The night felt full of sound. The scrape of a chair, the whisper of Edmund's voice, the small curse Agnes breathed under her breath when she bent to peer at the desk. When the door opened again, Edmund held the torn bit the way one might show an object in evidence. This belongs to a larger book. Someone has been keeping a roster of penalties and a ledger of mark-offs. His tone was even. He had turned the situation into administration. He looked at Evelyn with bright eyes. Who you were to look. Evelyn named Sarah without thinking. The name left her mouth like a breath. Sarah gave me a scrap in the dormitory. She heard the name in the corridor like a small bell. It set things moving. Edmund's lips thinned. Sarah. He sounded satisfied and wary at once. Why would Sarah give you this? Agnes answered for her. Children talk at night. Edmund. They trade scraps. Don't make more of it than it is. Her voice held protection and a plea not to escalate. Edmund looked at Agnes, then at Evelyn, then back at the torn page. Children talk. He repeated, they also witness. If a pupil removes things from official places, that is serious. He tapped his cane once. His refusal to shout made his point sharper. Evelyn felt the room narrow. She heard Sarah's name in her head and remembered the bedside scene weeks earlier when Agnes hauled Sarah from beneath the blanket. She felt the memory as a physical thing. The catch of breath, the flip of a wrist, that memory hardened her resolve. She had seen the roster's marks and the charm. She could not unsee the deliberate cruelty implied when a child's name carried a carved token. Later that night, back in the dormitory corridor, Evelyn moved with care. She slipped the torn page into her satchel and eased past a statue of a prefect at his post. She touched the seam of the fabric like a compass finding direction. Sarah sat on her bunk in the dimness, holding a sock between her knees. Sarah, Evelyn, her voice was low. Sarah looked up. Evelyn. She hesitated, fingers fumbling with the sock. Evelyn put the page on the bunk between them. Sarah swallowed. You brought it back? She asked. I kept the other half. Evelyn, we can find the rest. Her voice held a plan. There was a small rise in courage and action that followed the suspicion. That was the first shift. Suspicion loosened into active intent. They bent over the ink. Sarah traced the names with her fingertip. That charm, she said, that's Marlowe's. He lost it last month. They put it there on purpose. Her voice dropped. She named a boy everyone knew, a child who had been punished earlier that term. The naming changed the paper from curiosity into accusation. Evelyn, we need the full roster. She felt fear like cold wood pressing at the back of her throat, but fear had become fuel. If Edmund keeps records this way, he can single out any child he chooses. Sarah's jaw sore set. Agnes can help. She knows how to find drawers. Evelyn's doubt flickered. Could she trust Agnes? The matron had been brisk and stern. She had also rushed to protect a child from a late night pulling of a blanket. In the previous episodes, Agnes had shown a split in her actions. She enforced rules and then smoothed bruises behind closed doors. That contradiction offered Evelyn a slender hope. They planned in whispers. The second emotion shift arrived. Fear moved into a small, brittle hope and then into resolve. They would break into the study at night, after lights out. They would take the roster and the penalty ledger and show them to the school. The plan felt improbable and dangerous, but the roster's existence demanded action. Before midnight, Evelyn stood outside the study with Sarah and another pupil whose name was Markham. Markham's mouth was set. He did not speak much, but his hands were steady. Evelyn gave him the torn edge of the paper to hold while she picked the lock with a hairpin she had taken from the sewing box. The lock yielded with a tiny metallic click. Markham pulled the door. The room smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco. A desk sat under the lamp. Edmund's silver pocket watch lay open beside a blotter. Evelyn's breath caught at such domestic details, being close to ruin. They searched fast. Shelves rattled. Markham's lamp made a narrow cone of light, and in that cone the ledger appeared, a thick book bound in faded leather with a ribbon dangling. Evelyn found the roster behind a false panel. Her hand shook when she tugged it free. She and Sarah slit the ribbon and unrolled sheets. The roster listed names and marks, small cruciform ticks and letters that meant punishments assigned. Beside one child's name, someone had placed a tiny drawn charm. The carving matched the charm Evelyn carried in her pocket from her own satchel. She read aloud softly, "Marlowe, 3 marks." Markham hissed, "They signed our names." They marked what will happen. Evelyn folded the roster and slipped the ledger under her coat. They left the study without disturbing the watch or the blotter. On the stairwell, Markham whispered, "If Edmund catches us, then we show them," Sarah replied. Her voice had the hard edge of someone who had endured public shame and did not want another child to bear it alone. There were more decisions made by other children in that corridor than Evelyn had expected. That ensemble action changed the direction of the story. They did not make a scene the next morning, they prepared instead. At breakfast they exchanged small signals. When Agnes moved along the line handing out porridge, Evelyn let the ledger slip from her sleeve like a second bowl. No one noticed the bulge under the coat. Edmund lectured as always about duty. Obedience keeps order, order keeps safety. Pupils bowed their heads. The line moved. Evelyn kept her jaw set. The mid-chapter cliffhanger came when a prefect reached for the ledger's corner as if to write a spill and almost exposed the pages. Evelyn's fingers clamped down inside her coat. She felt the ledger tremble against her ribs. A whisper ran through her, "Will you be brave?" She breathed and the moment passed. That afternoon, matters shifted again. Agnes found her in the sewing room. "Evelyn," she said, and the matron spoke the child's name like a question. "You look tired." The words were small. She tugged at a loose thread in Evelyn's sleeve as if to check for holes. Evelyn realized Agnes had seen a tremor in her earlier and had chosen to speak in a low voice rather than the sharper tone of duty. Evelyn let Agnes lead her to a corner where the matron's keyring hung. Agnes touched the keys and said, "I know you were in the study. Why?" Her face did not harden, but a crease ran between her brows. Evelyn put the ledger on the table. Edmund keeps a roster. He marks penalties and leaves charmed signs. Look here." She slid the papers out. Agnes looked down and her mouth opened once. Nothing for a long heartbeat. Then she asked, "Who put that charm there?" Evelyn did not answer with naming a person. She answered with action. "They put it beside Marlowe's name." "That's deliberate." She felt anger move through her limbs like a light that turned instruments cold. The emotion showed in the way her hands did not tremble as much. Agnes took the roster and folded it carefully as if handling a fragile thing. She spoke slowly. "We must be careful." Her words were not a refusal. They were the kernel of a plan that had to be grown. This was an important turn. Agnes, previously enforcing order, now weighed protection against her fear of retribution. Edmund learned of the theft by afternoon. He called an inspection that evening and made a public speech about order and traitors. If anyone knows of a breach of trust, they will bring it forward now. His voice moved through the hall like a rock through still water. Evelyn went to the inspection with the ledger hidden in her satchel. Her legs felt like cords of rope. She kept counting steps in her head. In the refectory, pupils stood in rows. Edmund made them file past the platform. Obedience is not optional. Disobedience will meet clear consequence. He used the words not to warn, but to scare. It was a net meant to make them hand over secrets. Evelyn stepped forward when Edmund's back was turned. She stood on the inspection floor and held the ledger up so the lamplight caught the leather. This roster shows punishments assigned by name. Her voice did not shake. The hall went quiet in a way that left the sound of breath audible. Edmund moved. His first motion was not a shout. He reached for the ledger with slow fingers and tried to take it from her. "Give it to me, Miss Marks," he said. Agnes put herself between them. "Edmund, stop." Her hand lay flat on his sleeve. The matron's voice had an edge, more than the private pleas she had used earlier. She repeated, "Stop." The action of placing her body between headmaster and pupil forced a public recalibration. Edmund's jaw tightened. Agnes Holloway, step aside." The cadence of his words demanded obedience. Pupils watched. Some shifted. A few faces showed curiosity, others showed fear. Evelyn did not hand the ledger to Edmund. She turned the book so the pages were open where the roster's charmed mark showed next to Marlowe's name. "Look here. See the charm?" she pointed. Edmund lunged. He tried to seize the book with a quick motion meant to end the display. He did not reach it in time. In the bustle, a page slipped from the ledger and fluttered to the floor. It landed face up. The hall smelled of lamp oil and boiled porridge. The page displayed a list with names and a hand-written note beside one. Special observation and added measure. The meaning hit like a hammer. The hall erupted into murmurs. Pupils shifted and called names. Sarah's face went pale. Markham stepped forward. "That is Marlowe's mark." His voice was steady. The audience of pupils became witnesses. Edmund tried to seize the page. Pupils reached in reflex to stop him.
Someone shouted, "Don't take it!"
The rapid back and forth of voices filled the hall. Evelyn felt a pressure release in her chest and then grow into something else, relief mixed with dread. Agnes spoke loudly now for all to hear. "Listen. This is evidence. We will not decide here in the corridor. We will have a proper review." Her words were administrative, precise. She addressed Edmund as equals do when one needs to constrain another's authority. Edmund's face reddened. He put his cane between his hands and said, "You will hand me that roster, matron." His mouth set into a line of command. Agnes set the ledger on the platform and closed her hand over it. Then she did something unexpected. She turned the book so the school could see the names and the carved mark beside Marlowe. "We will review. All staff present will be present." The iron in her voice stopped any immediate seizure. The climax unfurled as a public reckoning. Pupils murmured. Some cried out. Edmund tried to reframe the ledger as a private administrative measure. "These are notes for the staff. They are not for children's eyes." His words were an attempt to contain the damage. Agnes answered him precisely. "If punishments are assigned that single out and humiliate children, the parents and trustees must know." Her words landed with the force of someone who had decided to choose transparency over compliance with authority. Edmund hesitated. He weighed the potential erosion of his control against the danger of being seen as cruel by the community. His cane tapped once. Then he did something the pupils would not expect. He reached for the ledger and tried to fold it closed to remove evidence from public view. Markham stepped forward. "You can't take it away, Mr. Blackwell." His voice had a firmness that matched the steadiness his hands had shown earlier. Others echoed. The assembled pupils and a few staff had lined up behind Agnes. The room had dynamically become a small public court. Edmund's mouth moved. He made several short, sharp sentences. "This is slander. This is theft. Who authorized this?" He demanded quick answers to slow accusations. The back and forth intensified. 3 to 6 brisk lines of exchange where Edmund tried to assert control and Agnes and the pupils pushed back. Finally Edmund closed his mouth and, for the first time in a long while, listened to the room's sound. That pause changed the structure of power for an instant. It allowed Agnes to say what she had been holding back. "Edmund," she said softly but firmly, We will show the trustees. We will not hide papers that name children and pair them with tokens. This is wrong. The matron's words were a break in their usual alignment and served as a pivot. Idmund's refusal was small and precise. Discipline cannot be undermined. He still believed that order required firm hands. But the public nature of the complaint and Agnes' presence shifted the risk calculation. The ledger went from instrument of quiet control to contested object under the eyes of many. That evening, in the quiet that followed, the headmaster retreated to his study. He closed the door with less certainty in his posture than before. Agnes took the ledger from the platform and, in the matron's office, folded it small and placed it beneath a cloth. She did this not with secrecy but with care. She wanted to keep it safe until the trustees could be called. Evelyn felt her pulse slow. The tension drained in slow increments. Pupils exchanged small gestures, an arm around a shoulder, a discreet nod. In the dormitory corridor, Marlowe touched his carved charm where it still hung by a string and said nothing. His silence was a small, steady bravery. The final emotional shift arrived not as triumph but as fragile steadiness. The school's authority had been shaken. Idmund had not been removed, but he had been shown that records could be seen and that charmed cruelties would not remain private. Agnes had endangered her position by placing herself between headmaster and pupil. She had also done something else. She had chosen to protect. Agnes found Evelyn later that night in the quiet room near the dormitory. She took Evelyn's hand and said, "You did right to bring this. You risked a lot." Her voice broke once. She did not preach. She quietly listed what needed to happen. A written complaint to the trustees, witnesses named, a locked deposit for the ledger until an investigation. Each item was ordered and practical. Evelyn folded the roster and placed it in Agnes' apron pocket. She felt its edges press against her palm through the fabric. Agnes closed her hand over it and slid her key into the lock of a small drawer. She turned it with a steady motion. The key scraped in the lock and then clicked home. That metallic sound became the chapter's final beat. "Agnes, keep this between us for now. We'll bring it when the trustees are here. We must not let them burn any bridges yet." Her words were a plan made of steps, not speeches. Evelyn nodded. She felt a tiredness that came from muscles unaccustomed to carrying a ledger and from a child's sudden knowledge of how systems could be used to hurt. She pressed the carved charm into her fist and felt its ridges. In the hours after, pupils murmured in small clusters. Some met each other's eyes and nodded. There were no grand speeches. There were instead small acts. Bread shared in the dormitory, boots swapped to help mend a sole, an extra blanket tucked around a shivering neck. Those acts were quiet solidarity, not triumphant declarations. Idmund returned to his office and wound his silver pocket watch with precise motions. He sat and began to make notes. His face was the same color as always, but the rapid tapping of his pen had a new rhythm. He did not yet concede error. He only adjusted tactics. Evelyn lay awake for a long time that night. She thought of the moments when Agnes had smoothed a bruise and when Idmund had tapped his cane. She thought of the ledger folded and the way Marlowe's name had been marked. She realized that the roster would not erase the past harm, but its exposure had changed the way harm could be hidden. By dawn, word had traveled beyond the dormitory in the smallest of ways. Notes slipped under doors, quiet conversations in the washroom. The rustle of a trustee's carriage arriving sooner than he might have expected. The school felt altered not by a single event but by the rearrangement of small things. Who stood where, who would speak in meetings, who would be asked to account for past choices. Agnes helped Evelyn mend a torn sleeve, and in the motion of suing she said nothing more than, "You kept your head." That praise was small, practical, and enough. Evelyn's silent reply was to press the carved charm to her heart. In the matron's office, Agnes locked the drawer and slid the key onto her ring. She tucked the ledger beneath a folded apron, and for the first time since the roster had come to light, she chose a visible act. She wrote a short note addressed to the trustees, naming the ledger, enclosing witness statements, and requesting an immediate review. She handed the note to a messenger to be placed in the trustees' hands that same morning. Evelyn watched Agnes do this, and then, before the messenger left, Evelyn added her own line to the note, a brief, clear statement of what she had seen and when. She wrote in a child's hand but with steady accuracy. She named Sarah and Markham as witnesses. The act of inscribing those details turned the night's events into something that could be verified. When the messenger rode off, Agnes closed the door and sat with her hands folded. She put her locket to her lips for a moment, and then slipped it back under her blouse. She did not say anything more about keeping secrets. She had chosen to put evidence where it would be seen by those with authority over Edmund. The ledger remained in the matron's locked drawer. The school would not be the same tomorrow, and the headmaster would not be able to carry on with the same private instruments of punishment without inquiry. The power that had operated silently in ink and charm had been forced into light. Agnes stood, placed a hand on Evelyn's shoulder, and guided her to the dormitory. She closed the door to the matron's office and turned the key in the lock one more time. That key's click was the last thing Evelyn heard before she climbed into bed and set the carved charm on her pillow. Agnes left the drawer locked, the ledger hidden, and the day determined to bring trustees and testimony. Outside the window, a carriage passed along the road toward the school. Its wheels whispered on gravel. Inside the dormitory, pupils shifted and settled. Evelyn lay still and felt the carved charm warm under her palm. The roster had been exposed. The ledger sat behind a lock. The school would answer questions now it could not avoid. The chapter closed with Agnes turning the key and the small, precise sound of metal meeting metal.